The evening was cool as Marcus Webb walked home from the community center, where he'd been volunteering to tutor young children in reading. At 72, his back ached more than it used to, but his spirit remained strong. He took the same route every Tuesday night, through Riverside Park, past the old oak trees he'd watched grow for decades, didn't notice the four young men until they stepped out from behind the stone wall. Well, look what we got here, the tallest one sneered, his voice dripping with venom. A real old-timer shuffling through our neighborhood. Marcus kept walking, his jaw tight. He'd lived through enough in his 72 years to recognize danger, but he'd also learned that sometimes the best strategy was not to escalate. "We're talking to you, old man," another voice called out. They surrounded him now, their words growing uglier, their intentions clear. What followed was brutal and swift, a cowardly attack driven by hatred and ignorance. When they left him on the ground, bleeding and broken, Marcus lay there for 15 minutes before a jogger called for help. 300 miles away, General James Marcus Webb sat in his office at Pentagon headquarters, reviewing classified reports. At 48 years old, he'd risen through the ranks with precision and excellence, earning the respect of every officer under his command. His uniform bore the insignia of a two-star general, a position he'd earned through decades of service and uncompromising dedication to duty. His phone buzzed. It was his sister calling. "James," her voice shook as she spoke. "It's Dad. He's been attacked. He's in the hospital." The world stopped. Within hours, General Webb was on a military aircraft, using his clearance and influence to cut through bureaucratic red tape. By midnight, he was standing in the hospital room, looking at his father's bruised face, his bandaged ribs, his swollen hands. Marcus opened his eyes and saw his son in uniform, tears streaming down his face. "Dad," James whispered, taking his father's hand carefully. "I'm here now." The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. General Webb used every resource available to him, not through abuse of power, but through proper channels and legitimate authority. Within 48 hours, the four perpetrators were identified and arrested. The evidence was irrefutable, but what happened next sent a clear message through the city. The general didn't seek personal vengeance. Instead, he ensured that the full weight of both federal and state law came down upon them. Hate crime charges were filed. Civil rights violations were documented. The media learned who had orchestrated the attack, and their faces were broadcast across every news network. More importantly, General Webb made a public statement. He stood at a press conference in his full dress uniform and spoke with the measured authority of someone accustomed to command. "My father is a decorated retired teacher who has spent his life building up this community. He was attacked because of the color of his skin. This is unacceptable in America. We have laws against hate crimes, and we will use every tool available to enforce them. Racism will not be tolerated. Not in this city. Not anywhere." The general's position, his credibility, and his willingness to publicly stand against hate gave the case a prominence it might not have otherwise received. The perpetrators faced serious federal charges. Local leaders who had previously ignored hate crimes in their jurisdiction suddenly found themselves under scrutiny. 3 months later, Marcus attended a community healing event organized by local clergy and civil rights leaders. His son sat beside him in uniform, and together they addressed a crowd of hundreds. "My father taught me that strength isn't about the size of your fists," General Webb said, his hand on his father's shoulder. "It's about the size of your character. My father's character is bigger than any hate these four young men could ever muster. And I promise you this, those who prey on the vulnerable will face consequences." Marcus squeezed his son's hand, pride and sorrow mingling in his expression. The four attackers received sentences ranging from 8 to 12 years in federal prison, with hate crime enhancements that ensured they would serve significant time. They had thought they were attacking a defenseless old man. They hadn't known his name, hadn't known his story, hadn't known that his son commanded thousands of soldiers and had the ear of the nation's highest military officials, but more than that, they hadn't understood a fundamental truth, that attacking one person is attacking the entire community that loves them. And in this case, that community included someone with the platform, the power, and the moral clarity to ensure that justice would be served. Marcus Webb recovered physically, though the emotional wounds took longer to heal. But he continued his volunteer work at the community center, his son visiting whenever duty allowed. And every time a young person asked him why he kept going, why he didn't let fear stop him, he would smile and say, "Because love is always stronger than hate." And justice, when it finally comes, reminds us that we are not alone.